On a quiet street, Lily noticed him immediately, an old man, struggling with a broken wheelchair. His face was deeply lined with age, beads of sweat forming on his forehead as he fought to free a stubborn will caught in the pavement crack. He looked utterly exhausted, as if the weight of the world had settled on his frail shoulders. His eyes, though tired, were resolute, and yet, despite his determination, no one around him stopped. No one even slowed down. Lily, though, did. She was late, very late. A crucial meeting that could save her cafe was waiting for her. But as she looked at him, struggling on the street, something inside of her shifted. She couldn't walk past him, not today, not when she could help. What she didn't know at the time was that this small act of kindness would come back to her in ways she never could have imagined. Welcome to Heartfelt Gratitude Stories, where acts of kindness and compassion are remembered long after the moment has passed. Let me tell you what happened next, because this isn't just about a broken wheelchair, it's about how one act of humanity can change everything. It was early morning in the small town of Havenbrook, the sun rising slowly, painting everything in its soft amber light. Havenbrook was one of those places where everyone knew everyone, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted down Main Street every morning, filling the air with the promise of a new day. Lily Parker, just 25, stood behind the counter of her cafe, the Willow Cup, watching the sun's rays filter through the window and create little golden specks of dust dancing in the air. The cafe had been her dream. With nothing but a small inheritance, some second-hand furniture, and a stubborn belief that good coffee could change a person's day, she had opened the cafe. The walls were lined with mismatched chairs, the menu written out daily on a chalkboard, and the sound of gentle jazz floated through the space from the old record player. It was cozy and warm, just like Lily had hoped. But today, despite the warmth of the sun streaming in, a cold knot of worry twisted in her chest. She had received a letter from the fire marshal's office. It was a harsh letter, blunt and unyielding. Her sprinkler system was outdated, no longer up to code, and she had only 10 days to bring it up to standard or face her cafe being shut down. 10 days. 10 days to come up with money she didn't have. 10 days until everything she had worked so hard for might slip away. She had tried everything she could think of. She called in every favor, searched through second-hand shops for parts, even considered taking out another loan, but nothing had worked. So, the night before, she made up her mind, she would go to the fire marshal's office and plead her case. Maybe, just maybe, they'd grant her an extension. The morning had come, and as she locked the door to the cafe, her heart was racing. She clutched a folder full of documents, the weight of it heavier than any paper it held. The fire marshal's office wasn't far, just a 15-minute walk, but with every step, it felt like the weight of her entire dream was dragging her down. That's when she saw him. He was sitting alone, an old man in a battered electric wheelchair, parked on the edge of the sidewalk. His hair was as white as snow, and his shoulders were hunched with age. His gaze was focused somewhere far ahead, lost in thought, while the wheelchair sat awkwardly, one wheel caught in a crack in the pavement. Lily could see the strain in his arms as he tried to free it, the quiet frustration of someone used to doing things themselves. The noise of the world continued around him, but no one noticed. No one cared. Lily hesitated, glancing at her watch. She was already late, but something inside of her told her that this moment was more important than any meeting. She set the file folder down on the nearest bench, crouched beside the man, and gently said, "Hi, looks like you're stuck. Can I help?" The man's eyes slowly lifted. His pale blue eyes were calm but filled with the weight of years lived. "It's this wheel," he said, his voice soft and measured. "It's caught. Can't quite get it free." Lily nodded. She could see what the problem was. The crack in the sidewalk was deep enough to trap the wheel, and the motor on the chair was whirring quietly, unable to pull free. She didn't hesitate. "Let me try," she said, slipping her fingers beneath the rubber rim of the wheel and tugging firmly. It didn't budge at first, but she leaned in, pushing with all her strength. Finally, with a soft pop and a jolt, the wheel came free. The chair lurched slightly, and Lily steadied it with both hands. She smiled, breathing hard, but relieved. "There, you're good to go." The old man nodded, his eyes bright with a glimmer of relief. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but full of gratitude. Most folks would have just kept walking. Lily shrugged, brushing the dirt from her hands. "I couldn't leave you stuck like that." She paused, wondering if she could ask, "Are you headed somewhere?" The man looked down the street, then back at her. "Just home," he said, his voice tinged with a quiet dignity. "I was visiting an old friend at the Veterans Hall. It's been a long morning." Lily smiled sympathetically, feeling something stir in her chest. There was something about the way he said it, so humble and proud, that made her heart ache a little. She introduced herself. "I'm Lily," she said softly. "John," the man replied. "John Beckett." Lily gave a small nod of respect, and her heart swelled with an unexpected tenderness. He shifted the joystick of his chair, and the motor hummed to life again. "You're a kind soul, Lily," he said, his words trailing off as he began to roll slowly down the sidewalk, the chair navigating the uneven pavement. He looked back once, his voice carrying faintly to her. "Not many like you left these days." Lily stood there for a moment, watching him disappear down the street. She didn't know why, but the whole interaction felt significant, as if she had just witnessed something important. Something bigger than she could grasp. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just helping an old man with a broken wheelchair. Something had shifted in her, and she couldn't ignore it. She picked up her file folder, glanced at the time, and hurried the rest of the way to the fire marshal's office. She was late, but she couldn't stop thinking about John Beckett. It was a moment of kindness, but it felt like it might be the one thing that could carry her through the impossible situation she now faced. When she finally arrived, out of breath and flustered, the receptionist barely glanced up. "Can I help you?" Lily swallowed her nerves, holding up the folder. "I'm here about the extension request for the Willow Cup." The receptionist flicked through some papers. "You were supposed to be here 15 minutes ago." "I know," Lily said quickly. "I stopped to help someone on the way. It made me a little late." The woman didn't look up. "I'm sorry, but the marshal's gone for the day." Lily's heart sank, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had just grown heavier. "Please," she pleaded, "just 5 minutes. I just need a little more time. I can get the money together." The receptionist's face softened for a moment, but then it hardened. "I'm sorry, but the deadline stands." Lily stood there, trembling, feeling as if the walls were closing in on her. She whispered a thank you, turned, and left the building, the heavy folder pressing against her chest like a weight she couldn't escape. Outside, the sky had turned gray, the cold air biting at her skin. She stood on the steps of the building, hugging the folder to her chest, trying to breathe through the rising panic. Her cafe was her world. It was everything she had worked for, and now it was slipping away, one deadline at a time. As she walked back to the cafe, every step felt heavier than the last. She thought of John Beckett, of his calm eyes, of the dignity with which he had carried himself. She wondered if he had faced days like this, days when everything felt like it was falling apart. She walked into the Willow Cup, the familiar creak of the door filling her ears. The cafe was still, the air smelling faintly of cinnamon and coffee, but it didn't comfort her the way it used to. She set the folder down behind the counter and wiped it clean with slow, methodical movements. Her heart was heavy with worry, and the cafe felt emptier than it ever had. She had done everything she could, but it wasn't enough. Not this time. The day passed slowly, each phone call a reminder that she was running out of options. The clock ticked on, and with every minute, she felt her dream slipping further away. But no matter what happened, Lily knew one thing for sure, she couldn't give up. And maybe, just maybe, in the darkest moments, when all seemed lost, the kindness she had shown to one lonely old man would be the very thing that would save her. Lily had never been one to ask for help. Not from her parents back in Ohio, who already worried far too much, and certainly not from her best friend from college, who lived miles away. Asking for help felt like admitting defeat, a surrender she couldn't afford. So, she carried it alone, shoulders straight, eyes bright with determination that felt more like a mask she wore to keep herself together. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending, but for now, she kept pushing forward. 3 days later, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Lily was wiping down the pastry case in the willow cup, lost in thought, when the bell above the door jingled softly. She looked up, expecting one of her regulars, but froze when she saw him. John Beckett. The old man from the sidewalk. He rolled in slowly, the quiet hum of his electric wheelchair breaking the silence of the cafe. Her breath caught in her chest. She hadn't expected to see him again, but there he was, looking as calm as ever. For a moment, Lily didn't know what to say. He didn't say much either, just gave her a quiet smile and spoke, his voice as steady as ever. "Good afternoon, Miss Lily," he said. "I was hoping you had a cup of coffee for an old man." She blinked, taken aback for a moment, then quickly recovered. "Of course," she said, her voice warm but slightly shaky. She moved behind the counter to prepare his coffee, trying to keep her movement steady even as her mind raced with a million questions. How had he found her cafe? Why had he come? She noticed that the wheelchair looked so much better now, no more tilting or struggling with the wheels. Had he fixed it himself, or had someone helped him? She poured the coffee, her hands steady, even as her heart pounded with curiosity. When she set the cup down in front of him, she couldn't help but watch him carefully as he took a sip. His eyes closed for a brief moment as the warmth of the coffee spread through him. "Perfect," he said simply. "You make a good cup of coffee, Miss Lily." Hearing her name in his gentle voice made her throat tighten, her emotions suddenly too much to hold back. "Thank you," she said softly, almost shyly. He glanced around the cafe, taking in the mismatched chairs, the old wooden tables, and the faded curtains. He gave a small, appreciative smile. "You've built a lovely place here," he said. "It feels honest." Lily laughed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "That's what I was going for," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "Honest," he nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on the ceramic mug. "It's a rare thing these days," he said, his voice almost wistful. "A place where people still care." The weight of his words lingered in the air between them, the soft strains of the jazz record floating around them like a blanket, wrapping the room in a sense of calm she hadn't realized she needed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, and it felt as though time had slowed just enough to let her breathe in the moment, let her absorb the quiet reassurance of his presence. She wanted to ask him why he'd come back, whether he remembered her from that morning when she'd helped him with the broken wheelchair, or if this visit was just a coincidence. But something in his eyes told her not to rush it. When he finished his coffee, he thanked her again, his words simple but sincere. Then, without much fanfare, he turned his chair toward the door and rolled out into the afternoon light. Lily stood behind the counter, watching him leave, feeling a flicker in her chest that she couldn't quite identify. Hope. Perhaps. It was a small thing, but for the first time in days, she felt something stirring inside her, something that wasn't fear or doubt, but a quiet, cautious hope. The next morning, the sun rose pale and cold over Havenbrook, and Lily unlocked the cafe's door, the key clicking in the old lock with a reluctant sound. She stood for a moment in the doorway, breathing in the familiar scent of roasted beans and worn wood, and reminded herself why she fought so hard for this place. She moved through the motions, grinding the beans, wiping down the tables, humming softly to herself as she always did. But in the quiet moments, when the shop was empty and the weight of the world pressed down on her, she could feel the looming deadline like a heavy stone in her chest. The money hadn't magically appeared. The deadline hadn't moved. And every empty chair felt like a reminder that she was running out of time. Still, she opened the doors every morning, served the regulars who still came, and tried her best to pretend that everything would be fine. But one morning, when the world felt especially heavy, she saw him again, John Beckett. He rolled in slowly, his chair moving smoothly over the worn threshold, as though he belonged here. He didn't say much at first, just offered her that same calm smile that seemed to settle something deep inside her, steadying her pulse. "Morning, Miss Lily," he greeted her softly. "Morning," she replied, pouring his coffee as if nothing had changed, though everything felt different. As she handed him the cup, he took a sip and studied her for a moment. "You look tired," he said, his voice gentle, as though he could see straight through her facade. Startled, Lily paused. "I'm okay," she said quickly, her smile stiff. "Just a lot on my mind." John didn't press her. He just nodded and took another sip, his eyes thoughtful. They talked about the weather, the music playing softly in the background, the leaves outside starting to turn gold. Nothing heavy. But somehow, in the simplicity of it all, Lily found herself feeling a little less alone. She didn't mention the deadline or the constant fear gnawing at her insides, and somehow, she didn't need to. His presence was enough. When he left that morning, he didn't say much more than a quiet, "Thank you," but Lily felt something shift. She didn't know why he kept coming back, didn't know what he saw in her small cafe that was worth the effort. But she was grateful. Grateful in a way she couldn't quite put into words. And that afternoon, for the first time in days, she whispered a quiet prayer to the morning light. "Let me find a way. Let me hold on." The next morning, the sun had just begun to rise when Lily unlocked the front door of the Willow Cup. She stepped into the cool air, her heart heavy with uncertainty, but when she saw the 3 small trucks parked in front of the cafe, her breath caught in her chest. The trucks were unmarked, but clearly ready for work. She blinked in surprise, her mind racing to catch up. And then, she heard the soft electric hum. John Beckett appeared at the edge of the sidewalk, rolling forward in his wheelchair with that same calm, steady expression. "Good morning, Miss Lily," he said warmly. "What is this?" she whispered, barely able to catch her breath. John gestured to the men who were stepping out of the trucks, older men, like him, with faces lined with time and service. "These are my friends," John said, "veterans like me, engineers, mechanics, builders, men who know how to fix what needs fixing." Lily's throat tightened, and before she could stop herself, the first tears slipped down her cheeks. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, overwhelmed. One of the men, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair, stepped forward, carrying a toolbox. He gave her a warm smile. "We're here for you, miss. John told us about your cafe and about you." Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they weren't just from fear. It was something else. Something bigger. John's eyes softened. "Say yes," he said gently. "Let us help for a moment." Lily hesitated. Her mind was full of worries, permits, rules, would she get in trouble for accepting help she hadn't paid for? But as she looked at these men, their faces full of quiet confidence, she realized there was no room for doubt. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes," she said softly. "Please. Thank you." And just like that, they got to work. Working as a team, they pulled out tools, pipes, wrenches, welding gear. One of the men handed her a bright yellow hard hat, and she couldn't help but laugh, wiping her cheeks. The men worked quickly, adjusting every piece of the sprinkler system, each movement calm and sure. Lily worked alongside them, her sleeves rolled up, her hands trembling at first, but as she worked with them, her breath became easier. At one point, she found herself next to Ray, a retired Air Force mechanic, and asked the question that had been on her mind since the beginning. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice broke a little. "You don't even know me." John's voice was soft but sure. "Because you stopped when you didn't have to. Because you saw a stranger stuck in the street, and you chose to help. That's the kind of thing that matters." Lily blinked hard, trying to hold back the flood of emotions. "It was nothing," she whispered. He shook his head. It was everything, he said. You reminded me that there's still kindness in this world, and that's worth paying forward for the rest of the morning. Lily worked beside them, learning from them, laughing with them. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things might be okay. You're a quick study, John said with a smile, his eyes twinkling with a hint of pride. Ever think of becoming a plumber? Lily laughed, surprised by how light her heart felt. It wasn't the kind of comment she'd expected, but somehow, it made her feel like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for a moment. I'll stick to coffee, she replied, her voice light but sincere. But thank you. John just grinned, his expression softening. We're the ones who should be thanking you, he said. As the day wore on, Lily watched the old, failing sprinkler system transform before her eyes. New pipes gleamed in the soft light, the fresh valves clicked into place with a satisfying finality, and the air smelled faintly of solder and sweat. But Lily didn't mind. In fact, she didn't even notice the exhaustion creeping into her bones because something else was happening, a quiet, profound sense of peace was settling over her. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could finally breathe. But even as the work neared completion, a flicker of doubt crept back into her chest. She pulled John aside, her voice low, almost a whisper. Are you sure this is allowed? She asked, glancing nervously at the workmen moving around her. I don't want you to get in trouble for helping me like this. John rested his hand on the armrest of his wheelchair, his gaze steady and reassuring. I spoke with the fire marshal myself, he said calmly. I explained who we are, what we're doing. He knows these men, respects them, and he understands this isn't charity. Lily swallowed hard, her shoulders slumping with relief. Thank you, she whispered, the weight lifting just a little. John smiled, a small, knowing grin. Don't thank me yet, he said. Let's get it finished first. They worked late into the afternoon, the sun's final rays turning the cafe windows into sheets of soft gold. Lily's arms ached. Her hair had fallen loose around her face, and she was covered in dust and sweat, but she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so alive. The men moved with practiced ease, laughing and talking quietly as they worked. The clink of tools filled the air, and at one point, one of the men started humming an old tune, low and sweet. Before Lily even realized it, she found herself humming along, the tune a strange comfort in the middle of all the chaos. When the final valve was tightened and the last pipe checked for leaks, John rolled forward, his eyes bright with satisfaction. You did good work today, Miss Lily, he said, his voice quiet but full of pride. She wiped her hands on her jeans, breathless, a smile spreading across her face. I just followed your lead, she said softly. John shook his head, his smile gentle. You did more than that, he said, his voice quiet but firm. You opened the door. You let us help. That's the hardest part. Lily glanced around at the shining pipes overhead, at the men who were now packing up their tools. There was a rush of quiet pride inside her, something that made her feel like she could finally stand tall again. I don't know how to repay you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. John's smile softened, his eyes kind. You already have, he said simply, and Lily felt the truth of those words settle deep in her chest. As the trucks rumbled to life outside, Lily stood in the doorway, watching them go. The last light of day bathed the street in soft, forgiving gold. She felt the exhaustion in her bones, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that came from work done with love, with purpose. Inside the willow cup, the new sprinkler system gleamed overhead, a silent promise that her dream wasn't over yet. And as she locked the door that night, a realization settled in her heart. Sometimes, help comes in unexpected ways. Sometimes, it arrives in the steady hands of strangers who become family. In the quiet strength of those who choose to stand by you, even when you feel like you can't stand anymore. And sometimes, it all begins with nothing more than stopping to help an old man on the side of the road. The next morning, Lily woke to the soft glow of sunrise spilling through her window. She lay there for a moment, the quiet of dawn wrapping around her like a blanket. The exhaustion in her body was heavy, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like something she could carry. She stretched, took a deep breath, and slowly got out of bed. When she finally walked to the willow cup, she found herself pausing at the door. The early light shimmered on the glass, and she could see the new pipes overhead, gleaming silver and strong. A fresh start. That's what it felt like. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of roasted coffee and polished wood filling her senses. She ran her fingertips along the new sprinklers, feeling the weight of gratitude settle in her chest. Later that morning, the town inspector arrived. He had a clipboard in hand and a polite smile on his face, but Lily's heart pounded in her chest as he walked through the café, checking every valve, every line. The silence felt deafening as he inspected the work, and Lily could feel every inch of her anxiety, every worry about whether this would be enough. Would he approve? Would her café survive? When he finally looked up, his smile widened. "You did good work here," he said. "The system is up to code. You're clear to keep operating." Lily felt a laugh slip out of her, bright and a little shaky. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "Thank you so much." As the inspector left, Lily stood alone in the center of the room, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. The fear that had clung to her like a shadow finally began to ease, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. Word of the repairs spread quickly throughout Havenbrook. Customers who had stayed away trickled back in, curious and smiling. Some offered quiet congratulations. Others simply ordered their coffee, and Lily noticed the warmth in their eyes, the kind that had been missing for so long. The willow cup was alive again, its hum and laughter filling the air, blending with the soft clink of cups and the scent of cinnamon rolls. Lily felt herself alive in it too, more than she had in weeks. One afternoon, she looked up from the counter to see John Beckett sitting by the window, his chair turned slightly so he could watch the street outside, his expression calm and content. Lily poured him a cup of black coffee and carried it over, setting it in front of him with a small, grateful smile. "It's on the house today," she said softly. He looked up at her, his pale blue eyes warm. "I'd argue you've more than paid me back," he said, his voice quiet and kind. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, folding her hands on the table. "How did you know?" she asked softly, her voice filled with curiosity and awe. "How did you know that I needed help?" John was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting out the window to where the autumn leaves were starting to gather in gentle drifts. "I didn't," he said at last. "I only knew you stopped to help when you didn't have to. That told me everything." Lily swallowed hard, her throat tight with unshed tears. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I thought I was going to lose everything." John nodded slowly. "Fear is a heavy thing," he said. "But you carried it well, Lily. You didn't let it stop you." She hesitated, then reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. "Thank you," she said again, her voice breaking just a little. He gave her a small smile. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful. "There were men I served with who taught me that, to stand firm even when you're scared. To help without asking what you get back." His eyes grew distant, the weight of memory softening his features. "Some of them didn't make it home," he said quietly. "And I think about them a lot, about how they'd want me to keep that spirit alive." Lily listened, her chest tight with quiet reverence. She could hear the unspoken stories in his voice, the echoes of men who had given everything so others could live. "I think," John said softly, "that helping each other is the greatest duty we have. That's what those men believed, and that's what I believe too." Lily nodded, her eyes bright with tears. "I believe it too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat in silence for a moment, the gentle sounds of the cafe moving around them, the laughter of customers, the soft hiss of the milk steamer, the warm hum of life that had returned to this place. Lily thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the doubt, the quiet act of kindness that had set all of this in motion. She realized then that the real miracle hadn't been the repairs, or the money, or even the survival of her dream. It had been the simple, quiet choice to help. That choice had become something bigger, something that reached beyond her little cafe and into the hearts of everyone who walked through its doors. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Lily stood and moved back behind the counter. She tied her apron with steady hands, her shoulders straight and her head high. She knew now what the Willow Cup was meant to be, a place for second chances, for quiet kindness, for the small, unseen moments that made the world a little brighter. The next morning, the cafe was busier than it had been in months. The line stretched out the door, laughter and conversation filling the air like music. Lily moved behind the counter, her hands sure, her smile easy. She poured coffee and wiped down tables, her eyes bright with quiet joy. Every cup she handed over felt like a promise kept, a promise that kindness would always find its way home. In the far corner, John Beckett sat with his old friends, the men who had come in trucks and tool belts, who had given their time and skill to save her dream. They sipped their coffee, talking in low voices, the soft rumble of their laughter grounding her in the moment. Every now and then, John looked up and caught her eye. And every time she saw the same gentle smile that had steadied her heart when she'd needed it most. As the day wore on, the sun turned the windows to warm gold, and Lily paused to take it all in. She saw the small things, the way a customer's shoulders relaxed when they took their first sip, the soft murmur of an old couple sharing a pastry, the quiet hush of a young man reading a worn book in the corner. She realized that the Willow Cup was more than a business. It was a home, a place for anyone who needed a little warmth in a world that could be cold and unforgiving. And she promised herself in that soft light of the afternoon that she would always remember the lesson John Beckett had given her. That sometimes the smallest act of kindness can ripple out in ways we can't imagine. That even when we're scared, even when we feel alone, there is strength in choosing to stop, to see, and to help. As the last customer left that night and Lily locked the door behind them, she looked out at the empty street. The quiet of the evening settled over the town. She thought of the day she'd stopped for a stranger in a broken wheelchair. She thought of how that moment had turned into 1,000 other kindnesses, each one a quiet echo of that first choice. And she knew, with certainty, that the Willow Cup would always have room for one more seat, for anyone who needed it. For anyone who believed, like she did, that kindness, real, simple, unshakable, could change everything. That night, she switched off the lights one by one. The soft click of each bulb, like a heartbeat in the dark. In the quiet glow of the final lamp, she turned and saw John Beckett watching her from his corner table. His hands wrapped around his cup. He didn't say a word. He just nodded once, a silent promise that some things never fade. And Lily smiled back, her heart full and steady, ready for whatever might come next. In a world that often feels fragmented and disconnected, we underestimate the power of small, quiet acts of kindness. It's so easy to get caught up in our own struggles, convinced that we have to face everything alone. But the truth is, we don't. Helping others, even when it seems like a small thing, can spark something bigger, something that ripples outward in ways we may never fully understand. The real strength lies in choosing to see others, to offer help without expecting anything in return. In a society that too often values achievement over compassion, we must remember that kindness and community are what truly sustain us. It's not the grand gestures but the everyday moments of support that make a lasting impact. Let's not wait for a crisis to remind us, let's live with open hearts and help, quietly and often, without question. Subscribe to Heartfelt Gratitude Stories, where justice gets its due, kindness lingers, and no quiet hero is ever forgotten.